Delete everything. She's starting from scratch. That's what I heard when I walked back into the office, coffee still warm in my hand. My supervisor, Mark, was leaning over IT's desk, voice casual like he wasn't ordering the destruction of 12 months of my life. On the monitor was my project folder, open, highlighted, seconds from being wiped. A year of late nights, skipped weekends, and canceled vacations, gone with one keystroke. He didn't even glance at me as he added, "She needs to learn to follow instructions, not improvise." I stood there, frozen, every muscle tight. The project wasn't just code, it was the culmination of everything I'd built since joining this company, and he knew it. I didn't speak, not yet, because if Mark thought deleting my work would erase me, he didn't realize I'd kept something outside the system, something that could ruin him. I sat at my desk, staring at the empty folder like it was a grave. Mark strolled past, smug, patting my chair as if I were some intern who'd been taught a lesson. "Next time, follow the brief," he said, low enough so no one else would hear. I didn't answer. My mind was already moving faster than my pulse. He thought I'd back down, start over, burn myself out again to prove my worth. What he didn't know was that every key stage of the project, the real breakthroughs, were backed up at home. Not just code, but notes, prototypes, the data models no one else could replicate. And something else, a private email thread from Mark himself to a consultant whose domain name just happened to match one of our biggest competitors. I hadn't looked at it in months, but now it glowed in my memory like a flare in the dark. That night, I pulled up the backups on my home laptop, the hum of the fan filling the silence. There it was, 6 months of work, intact, safe from Mark's little purge. But the emails were worse than I remembered. He hadn't just been sharing updates, he'd sent full architecture diagrams, access credentials, even internal testing data. It was everything they'd need to replicate our system. I scrolled through the thread, my jaw tight. One message caught my eye, dated just 3 days ago, where he told them we were behind schedule and hinted that my incompetence was to blame. I leaned back, my fingers resting on the keyboard. If I moved too fast, I'd spook him. But if I timed it right, I could burn both bridges for him, the one here and the one with the people he was trying to impress. That thought alone kept me awake until dawn, planning every step. The next morning, I walked into the office like nothing had happened, coffee in hand, a faint smile on my face. Mark barely glanced at me from his glass-walled corner, probably thinking I'd spent the night sulking. Let him. While he paraded around in meetings, I slipped into the server logs, tracing every external IP that had accessed our files. Each one matched the competitor's headquarters. The evidence was undeniable. But I didn't take HR, not yet. HR worked for the company, and the company protected its managers. Instead, I reached out to an old friend at the industry's biggest trade publication. I sent them just enough proof to pique interest, but not enough to publish. "Wait for my signal," I wrote. At the same time, I started rebuilding the project in secret from my backups, renaming every file, restructuring the code, so when the dust settled, only I would have the working version. By midweek, Mark's arrogance had grown unbearable. He strutted into the bullpen, clapping his hands like a coach. "Fresh start, team. Let's put last quarter behind us," he said, glancing at me as if daring me to argue. My jaw tightened, but I just nodded and went back to typing, lines of code that weren't for him anymore. That afternoon, I overheard him on a call with our competitor, laughing about how much easier things would be now. He had no idea I'd tapped into the mirror drives he thought he'd wiped. Every shady transfer, every late-night file dump, every message with his new partners was sitting in my encrypted folder. And then came the email from the competitor's CTO, accidentally forwarded to me. "Glad you cleared your team. Can't wait to see what you bring." My hands trembled, not with fear, but with the thrill of knowing the final piece had just fallen into place. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop glowing in the dark, piecing together the timeline. The competitor's offer to Mark wasn't new. It went back months. He'd been feeding them scraps of our development plans while subtly sabotaging ours, making delays look like my fault. The data loss wasn't an accident. It was the final step before he jumped ship. My hands hovered over the keyboard as I organized screenshots, logs, and emails into neat folders labeled by month. Each one was a nail in his professional coffin. By 3 a.m., I had enough to not only end his career, but drag our competitor into a legal war they'd never see coming. But this wasn't just about revenge. This was about making sure no one else ever got steamrolled the way he'd just tried to flatten me. My plan wasn't finished, but by sunrise, the first domino would be ready to tip. At 8 a.m., I walked into the office like nothing was wrong. Mark was in the break room, laughing with the same junior staff he used to send to check my progress. He didn't even glance my way. Perfect. I slipped into my desk, plugged in my laptop, and began uploading the evidence to an encrypted drive, one that automatically sent copies to 3 different lawyers I'd quietly contacted through an old friend in compliance. Mid-morning, I requested a status update meeting with the board, making it seem routine. They agreed without hesitation. After all, I'd been the project lead before Mark started his little coup. By noon, my phone buzzed with confirmation from a journalist I'd fed the story's outline to, just enough to make them curious, not enough to spook them. Mark thought today was business as usual. He didn't see the trap I was building right under his feet, each thread pulled tighter until there'd be nothing left for him to stand on. The boardroom smelled faintly of coffee and carpet glue, the kind of sterile scent that made people drop their guard. Mark strutted in 5 minutes late, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He didn't bother hiding the smirk. "Let's keep this brief," he said, flipping open a notebook like the meeting was his show. I waited until the CFO finished her routine updates before sliding a slim folder across the table. "You'll want to see this," I said evenly. Inside were side-by-side timelines, my project's milestones, and the suspicious gaps after Mark took over. Missing deliverables, altered files, patterns of accidental deletions that all coincidentally benefited a direct competitor. The CFO's pen stopped midair. A few seats down, the head of legal leaned forward. Mark's smirk faltered, just slightly. I could see him calculating, wondering how much I really had. He still didn't know I hadn't shown them everything yet, not even close. Mark tried to laugh it off, calling it an unfortunate coincidence, but his voice cracked halfway through. The head of legal didn't smile. "Coincidences don't transfer proprietary code to a rival company's server," she said flatly, tapping the last page of my folder. His eyes darted to me, quick, sharp, almost pleading, but I kept my expression unreadable. I mentioned, almost casually, that I'd already backed up the full audit trail and sent copies to an external investigator and to one of our largest investors. The room went still. Even the ticking of the wall clock seemed louder. "You blindsided me," Mark hissed under his breath, but I didn't flinch. He'd spent months erasing my work, thinking I'd start over like nothing happened. Instead, I'd let him dig his own grave, one file at a time. And now, the people who once took his word over mine were staring at him like they'd just realized who he really was. By the next morning, the news had spread beyond our floor. People avoided Mark's office like it was radioactive. I passed conversations in the hallway, his name whispered with words like lawsuit and criminal. The investor I'd tipped off had already called an emergency board meeting. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. The looks I got from the few board members passing through told me enough. At lunch, I found an email in my inbox from a competitor CEO, one I'd never met, saying he'd heard impressive things about my skills and was interested in talking. I didn't respond right away. Timing was everything. Mark had built his power on making me seem replaceable, disposable. Now, with his influence crumbling and my name being whispered in rooms I'd never had access to before, I realized something. He hadn't just deleted my year's work. He'd accidentally given me the leverage to rebuild my career on my terms. And this time, he wouldn't be anywhere near it. That afternoon, HR called me in. The room smelled like burnt coffee and nerves. 2 representatives sat stiffly, legal pads in front of them. "This is just a fact-finding meeting," one began, voice too calm to be genuine. They asked about my project, the deletion, the investor calls. I kept my tone even, giving them just enough detail to make them realize they were standing on a live wire. I didn't mention the competitor's interest. That was mine to keep. Across the hall, Mark's office door slammed hard enough to rattle the glass. He'd clearly been told something he didn't like. As I walked back to my desk, eyes followed me, but this time it wasn't pity. It was curiosity. In corporate halls, curiosity can be more dangerous than open hostility. They were starting to wonder if I'd survive this. I almost smiled. Survive? I wasn't aiming to survive. I was aiming to make sure Mark didn't. By the next morning, the air in the office felt electric, sharp, humming like a storm about to break. Rumors were spreading faster than emails. Someone had leaked that a serious breach in project handling was under review, and Mark's name was attached. He walked in late, jaw tight, eyes darting, the swagger gone from his step. I stayed quiet, focused on my screen, feeding him just enough rope. At 11 a.m., my phone buzzed. Our competitor wanted to meet in person that evening. They doubled their offer, and now they were talking about full team migration. "We want your vision, not just the files," they said. I closed my laptop and stood. Every step toward the elevator felt like shedding weight. Mark had erased my work thinking it would erase me. But all he'd done was make me too valuable for this place to afford losing. And the real blow was still coming. That evening, I sat in the sleek glass conference room of our competitor's HQ, the city skyline burning gold behind them. Their legal team slip a contract across the table. Signing bonus, leadership position, full autonomy, and my pick of the engineers I trusted most. It wasn't just a job offer, it was an escape route and a declaration of war in one neat stack of paper. I didn't hesitate. My pen moved like I'd been waiting for this moment my whole life. By the time I walked out, my inbox was lighting up. Messages from my current teammates, some furious, some desperate to join me. Mark had no idea yet that his victory was already slipping through his fingers. I thought about his smirk that day in the server room, how certain he'd been. Soon, that same room would feel like a cage to him, and I'd be the one holding the key. The news broke before sunrise. Trade blogs splashed headlines about the competitor's strategic acquisition of my work and the exodus of top talent following me. By 9 a.m., half the floor had emptied. People Mark had relied on for years, handing in their badges, walking straight into our rivals' offices. I heard from a friend in HR that he'd stormed into the CEO's office, shouting about loyalty and sabotage. But the truth was simple. He'd burned every bridge himself. Worse, the competitor had already begun pitching our former clients with my perfected version of the project, one that worked flawlessly. Every deal they signed was another nail at his career's coffin. He'd thought deleting my work would erase me. Instead, it made my name echo louder in the very circles he was desperate to impress. By the end of the week, Mark was gone, escorted out with a cardboard box while the office pretended not to watch. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. My phone was buzzing with messages from partners, investors, and journalists wanting interviews. The competitor's CEO called me personally, not just to thank me, but to say, "You were the missing piece." Mark had gambled on my silence, thinking humiliation would break me. Instead, I rebuilt my work stronger, faster, and in better hands. And as I stood in my new corner office overlooking the city, I realized he hadn't just lost his job, he'd handed me the career he always wanted.